on making mistakes, learning, and resilience. So while we wait for attendees to register, because I can see that, wow, numbers are rapidly going up, I thought that to potentially kind of keep you a bit active, and knowing that this panel is quite an international panel, we have Brittany, who's in San Francisco right now, Tali, who's in Boston, Nora, who is in Lyon or around Lyon, are you?
In Lyon.
In Lyon itself, amazing. And looking at the actual attendee list, I know that there are people joining from many different countries. So please excuse me that actually Zoom polls only allow you to do polls with specific, I guess, set of options. So having had a look at the attendee list, I came out with some options of countries, obviously not being able to list all of the countries in the world. You'll please excuse me if it is quite limited. However, I have given you some options if you obviously do not live in the countries that I've mentioned, but I'm going to put the poll live and allow panelists to vote. Let's see. So now you should basically be seeing on your screens that you have different options of countries to see who is joining us from where. So now we see a few people from Belgium, Switzerland, indeed, and people not being mad about me not mentioning the country where they're actually from. So that's really great. Yeah, so as we can see, it's quite an interesting mix of people. There's still a few people who haven't voted, so if you're just coming in and have seen this little poll pop up on your screen, feel free to let us know where you're joining us from. And I will wait just a little bit. Okay, 92% of votes, amazing. I will just wait a tiny bit before showing you the results of the poll until a few more attendees come in. Amazing. Well, so results are not changing that much. Okay, so I will show you now the results from the poll. There we go. So as you can see, obviously an overwhelming majority of people from the UK, but we do have people joining us from other places around the world, and also countries that we have not mentioned in this poll. Okay, so that's the end of the fun for this beginning bit. So yeah, I think given now that the number of attendees hasn't changed that much in the past few minutes, I think that we're going to officially start the event. So I wanted to give a warm welcome to everyone for joining us from different parts of the world on this fantastic panel, as I had mentioned, on failure, learning, and resilience. I'm Ellie Horowitz, and by day I'm Director of Research at this London-based think tank called Reform. And by night and during my weekends, I have the pleasure of being the curator of the London hub of this lovely community called One Health Tech. For those of you who don't know One Health Tech, One Health Tech is a grassroots community which seeks to promote and champion diversity within the area of health tech, kind of broadly life sciences and med tech. We have over 10 hubs worldwide, most of them being in the UK, but increasingly growing internationally, which is really great. And what that means is that we have actually a quite big membership base of about 13.5K contributors who are kind of signed up to our database to either attend events or get involved in organizing events like I do. And we do a whole bunch of other stuff, like, for example, organizing skills-based workshops to help, either with, how to pitch your kind of startup to investors, or be it kind of coding skills or different things. And I think one of the defining characteristics of One Health Tech is really the fact that we are a very warm and welcoming community. And it's something that we kind of pride ourselves with, which I think makes us slightly different to other communities out there. And so to give you a bit of context about kind of OHT week, because maybe possibly some of you have seen through social media that we've decided to launch this whole series of events this week. Given confinement, we really decided to kind of rethink the type of activities and the ways that we could bring our community together. And actually, this is the kind of first trial run of a fully kind of virtual series of events. We've basically kind of brought several teams from different hubs, so working together, so be it, from Sweden to the UK, and different hubs actually across the UK working together to bring this kind of full series of events together. So we've had a very, very busy week. So some of you I know have been to some of the great pajama yoga sessions that we've had. We've also had fireside chats. We had an excellent fireside chat on Monday with Dame Sally Davis, and had a kind of few lightning talks with startups, different webinars, quizzes, and a whole host of other activities that we will also be having after this event. And really, I am very excited about this panel event tonight, talking about failure and resilience, because I think it is an extremely important topic that we don't generally get to talk about that much, and definitely not with the type of panelists that we have the privilege of having today. So I will actually let them introduce themselves rather than reading their very impressive biographies, but just to kind of give you a brief idea of who's with us today. We have the pleasure of having Dr. Nora Berra, who used to serve as France's Secretary of State for Health under the government of Nicolas Sarkozy. We also have Brittany Linton, who is a licensed clinical psychologist, currently working at the Department of Veteran Affairs, in the United States. And she is a resilience specialist, right? Am I right in saying that? Amazing. And also Thalie Charrotte, who is joining us tonight from Boston. She is a professor of cognitive neuroscience at the Department of Experimental Psychology at University College London, and is currently based at MIT as well, right? You are, yeah. Amazing. Nora, do you want to potentially introduce yourself briefly for kind of one or 2 minutes, and I'll just kind of basically then go around to Brittany and Thalie.
Thank you, Eleonora, for this introduction. I'm very happy to be here with you with this topic that is very relevant in this particular period of COVID-19. I'm Nora Berra. I'm a medical doctor. I used to work in the hospital here in Lyon in charge of HIV patients. I did that for 20 years, almost 20 years, with a lot of activities in clinical research, testing new drugs, new combination of therapies. Until 2009, and then I went into politics. I was elected as a member of the European Parliament, and then nominated in the French government, first in charge of elderly, and then I switched for health. It was quite interesting for me as a medical doctor, and I have some crises to manage during my period of this portfolio. And after my ministerial activity, I went back to the European Parliament, and now I'm still elected here in the region Auvergne-Rhône-Alpes, here in Lyon. And my main focus and my main interest now is working on global health, because we used to think that in France we have a very good health system, but I consider that we have some objectives to follow, the sustainable development objectives. So I'm engaged for that, and I try to work with my colleagues, former ministers in Africa, for that.
Great, thank you very much. Brittany.
Good evening, everyone, or wherever you are in the world. So my name is Dr. Brittany Linton, and I am a licensed psychologist here in the United States. I currently work for the Veterans Affairs Health Administration, where I work directly with our military veterans, particularly in integrated healthcare settings. So my background is in working directly in exam rooms alongside my physician colleagues and with other healthcare professionals to make sure that we focus on whole body health and helping people better understand how their mind and body are related in their healthcare access and needs and well-being. Before this, I did a stint in mental health technology startup. And so I had a really grand chance to work alongside a wide variety of technologists who are really trying to advance the field around mental health care access and how we do so digitally and successfully. And then before all of that, my research really honed in and focused on the world of positive psychology and resiliency and thriving. And that's been a tenet of my work throughout everything I do and the people that I have a chance to work alongside and work with the patients I have a chance to serve, is how do we make sure that your deep wells of strength and resiliency and the struggles and failures that you've accessed or experienced in the past can come forward to serve you today and going forward. So I'm really excited to be here alongside everyone else to talk about this further.
Great, thank you very much. Tali.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Tali Sherratt. I'm a professor of cognitive neuroscience at University College London. So cognitive neuroscience is kind of a mix of psychology, neuroscience, and behavioral economics. And I mix it together to try and figure out why people do what they do, why they feel the way that they do, how these things interact, which is how your way that you feel interact with the way that you make decisions. And I guess kind of one part of it is understanding how the brain gives rise to all of this. So we bring people into our lab and we try to understand the brain mechanisms that give rise to how you make decisions every day, how you interact every day. And so I have a lab at UCL called the Effective Brain Lab, in which we usually do our research. So now we're doing it online. And I am also, as mentioned, currently at MIT.
Sorry, I need to unmute myself. Sorry about the mishaps of online event logistics. So I just thought I would remind you about how this event is going to be carried out. So I was thinking of having a chaired discussion with our panelists for the next kind of 35 to 40 minutes, and then open up to Q&A from the audience. As you will see, you have a little kind of Q&A chat, and you can kind of be sending questions throughout, and that's completely fine, but I will kind of come back to them towards the end of the session. So to kickstart with the really important stuff, have you picked up any new incredible skills during confinement? I'll start with Brittany.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, one of the skills I've actually picked up is disconnecting, because as I found with many of my friends and colleagues, we are now connected throughout every instance of our day in some respects and reliant upon a device for most of, if not all of our social interactions that we're having. And so I'm actually finding talents and opportunities to step away from all of my devices, shut everything down, and almost take a mini vacation in my home where I'm not being bombarded by screens and activity.
That's quite nice. Nora, do you have any tips or tricks?
Yeah, I learned how to sew masks.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I took my sewing machine and I tried to elaborate a mask to protect myself, my mother, and my sisters. So you know that we had a very lack of furniture, especially of furniture of masks here in
medical equipment. Yeah, the protective equipment.
Yeah, medical equipment and the masks especially. So everyone tried to elaborate their own mask. I did mine. So new skills that I have now.
Do they have funky patterns, or they're still quite plain?
Yeah, I did one very customized to my daughter, and you know, it's with a signature now.
Hi.
A special. Yeah, I don't have it now, but I can take it at the end and I show it to you.
Great, amazing. Can't wait to see it. Tali?
Yes, so I became a primary school teacher in the last 2 months, teaching my 5-year-old and my 7-year-old reading and math. So I think that's the main skill, how to structure a whole school day, how to teach these things, keep them engaged, and all of that. So I guess it's a little bit different than teaching undergraduates or giving talks to full-grown adults.
I can imagine. Do you find that you use any of the kind of lessons from behavioral tricks that you've learned throughout your career on them, or not really?
So in fact, I usually do, and I don't know if I do it more now. So I definitely use my kids as subjects, and it actually works extremely well. And so I have the latest book is called Influential Mind, and it's all about like changing behavior, and it's for adults, but it works especially well for kids. So yes, giving them a sense of control, especially now when control is limited, really important. Giving them things to look forward to, especially now when all the events have been canceled. So you really need to kind of think through those things. And that's actually a thing that I always did with my kids. And I did find that very helpful. So I continue to do that.
Great. Fantastic. So now on to the kind of meat of the subject, discussing and talking about making mistakes, which is the kind of first kind of part of this event. I guess one of the very first difficulties that we face when making a mistake is simply facing facts and admitting that we might have been wrong. Despite it being something that is obviously universally experienced, it can often make us feel extremely uncomfortable. And we might want to hide it instead of confronting it. And I think this is true regardless of whether, we are an academic, an entrepreneur, or a politician, and actually may be particularly true for one of the professions that I mentioned. And so I kind of wanted to potentially start to address why it's so difficult to admit that we're wrong. And I wanted to start with Tali, but actually before moving on to asking you that specific question, Tali, as I mentioned to you just before the beginning of this session, I actually stole a page from Tali's book, and wanted to replicate one of the experiments that she has run with you. Watching and attending this event right now. So I will just pull out the second poll this evening. Hopefully this will work. Tali, you will let me know if...
Just to not take credit, this is not my experiment, but an experiment that was done in the 1960s.
Okay, no problem. Not taking credit. So I will launch the poll right now and explain what you are seeing. So basically what you need to do is to find the rule that applies to the series of 3 numbers. So the 3 numbers are 2, 4, 6. And basically, is the rule that you're adding 2 from the previous number? Or is it that it's simply just a sequence of even numbers? Or is it the rule that it's a sequence of escalating numbers? Or you have no idea. So feel free to vote. We have only 8% of people who've engaged yet, 17, 20, amazing, it's going up. And let's see who eventually gets it right. Okay, let's wait for a few more people to vote. Almost everyone has voted. It's quite interesting to see the most popular opinion seems to be that you should be adding 2 to the previous number. Up until now, it's just a sequence of even numbers, doesn't seem to be too popular. It's a sequence of escalating numbers, a little bit more popular, and there's still a few people who have no idea. You can also vote, by the way, Nora and Brittany, if you want to. Okay. Well, no more votes coming in. Amazing. So I will end the poll and show you the results. There we go. So the results show 60% that it is just that you're adding 2 to the previous number. 10% that show that that think that the rule is that it's simply a sequence of even numbers. 17% that it's a sequence of escalating numbers, and 13% who have no idea. So Tali, I will let you give the answer to people about this experiment, particularly explain the kind of context of this experiment, and maybe elaborate a bit on why it is so difficult to admit that we're wrong, and what does cognitive neuroscience say about that?
So in fact, no one's wrong here. So let me take this a step forward, and I'll try to do this. So let's say, Brittany, what did you choose?
I selected I have no idea, because there's so many rules that could be applied.
And that's right, because this is not quite the experiment that I'm trying to. Nora, what did you select?
I wanted to select the three first, but I couldn't. So as I went...
Okay, but the one you think, what was number 3?
No, as I went to the second, the first has been removed. So it finished with the second answer.
Okay.
Wait, just the one that you wanted. The one that you wanted was adding 2. Is that?
Oh, obviously
No.
it was the first. Obviously.
Adding 2. Okay, great. Okay, so you think the rule is adding 2. Now I'm going to give you an opportunity to give me 3 numbers, and I will tell you if those numbers actually confirm to the rule that I have. So I generated 3 numbers according to some rule. We don't know what the rule is. I'm going to give you an opportunity to give me 3 numbers, and I'll tell you whether it confirms to the rule or not. So if you want to give me 3 numbers, and I'll tell you whether it confirms to the rule.
You're asking Nora, I think.
Nora, yes.
Oh.
Sorry.
Sorry. I haven't catch.
So you give me now 3 numbers, and I'll tell you whether it confirms to the rule that generated those numbers. The first
3 other
Yes.
numbers.
Yes.
So we were at 6, so I would say 8, 10, 12.
8, 10, 12. So yes, that confirms to the rule. And now, do you want to guess the rule?
Yeah. No. It's adding 2.
So that's not the rule that generated. It could have been the rule, but it wasn't the rule that generated this. So the point of the experiment is actually not to figure out what the rule is at all. It doesn't matter so much the rule. The point of the experiment is that once people have an idea about what the rule is, once they have a belief, your belief was, which could have been true, there's no reason why it couldn't be true, that you add 2 numbers. So once people have a belief, the first thing they do is they try to find evidence to confirm that belief. So then what you do is you try to find something that will confirm your belief, that would have another example of the same belief, which is 6, 8, 10, right? That's what people usually do. And what people almost never do is they don't try to give an example that's counter, that will disregard that rule. So for example, you could have said, how about 5, 10, 100? And I would say, yes, that confirms my rule, because my rules is just escalating numbers.
Yeah.
And that straight away you would know that what you thought was wrong, and now you have to think about something else. So that's kind of the point of the experiment. And even when you go on, and we don't have enough people here to play the game, but even when I say to you, yes, those 3 numbers confirm my rule, but my rule is not adding 2, you then go to the next person and they still give you 10, 12, 14, right? So they're still kind of really into examples that are generated from the other rule. But the rule in this game was just any kind of escalating numbers. So 0, 1, 100 would be a yes, but -2, 1, 60 would be a no. So that's kind of the idea of it, that we kind of focus on our beliefs. And the idea, if we, and the experiment is not about numbers. The experiment is important because we all have a set of beliefs in our heads, right? So we have a set of beliefs about ourselves, about how things should work in our industry, in our company, in politics, it's beliefs about gender. And we go out into the world and we constantly try to find more and more examples and evidence that will confirm our beliefs, that will show that what we already believe is true, that will make us more confident. And rarely do we go out into the world and try to find examples that will challenge those beliefs. We don't actively try to see, let me see if there's evidence that would actually show that I'm wrong. So that's kind of the human tendency for confirmation, which is what the experiment does, although it's kind of done in a little bit different way than what we did it at the
Yes,
moment.
yeah. I was aware of that. It's just that you can't.
Yes. It's a difficult one. Yeah.
But so if I could ask you just in briefly 1 minute, what are, I guess, the kind of reasons why it's difficult to admit that we're wrong? It really is just, in a nutshell, because of the confirmation bias, that it's kind of difficult for us to be able to kind of face the fact that actually some facts might contradict what our deep-seated beliefs actually are.
Yeah, so it's not so much that we know we are wrong, but we won't admit it. It's more that we're not even aware that we're wrong. We're not recognizing that we're wrong. And that is to a huge extent because of the confirmation bias. So one is how we seek information, right? We tend to seek information that confirms our beliefs. And today, with a click of a mouse, you can do that no problem. You want, do you believe that lockdown should be prolonged? You found thousands of articles that suggest that's true. You think lockdown should be lifted? You go online, found 1,000 of articles to confirm that's true. And so the evidence in front of you is limited to start off with what you believe. That's the first problem.
Yeah.
The second problem is, what do you do with the information that's in front of you? And what we and many others people have found is that you're more likely to take the information that confirms what you believe to update your beliefs, right? And then you become more confident. And when you do get evidence that counters your prior beliefs, you look at those with critical eye. So you don't take it so much into consideration and don't update your beliefs that much when it's counter. So it's how we seek information and then how we use it to update our belief that makes us more confident in what we believe. It can also cause polarization, because if two people start off with different belief, they seek information differently, they update differently, and they grow apart rather than coming in together. So it's the recognition that we are wrong, which I think is the bigger obstacle than just knowing that you're wrong, but not wanting to tell others and yourself that you're wrong.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And actually, Brittany, from your experience as a licensed psychologist, and maybe what you've potentially kind of learned from seeing patients and being with patients and discussing different issues with them, would you have a slightly different perspective potentially on why it's difficult to admit fault or failure?
Yeah, so in the neurocognitive stance, I completely agree with everything that was just suggested, but I also think about, to piggyback off of that, I also think about how we do not reward failure within our society the vast majority of time. And whether that reward is even just opening up the space for us to talk about our failures or the areas that we may have stumbled or had difficulties, we don't really join with each other or invite others to really enter to that space of vulnerability where you have to admit things didn't go the way I planned or was anticipating or I had hoped for. And first, even try to admit that internally to yourself can be such a struggle. I mean, I want everyone to just take a moment to think about, when was the last time you might have messed up in the last week? And how hard was it for you to even just sit with that experience and that feeling for 30 seconds? Most of the time, it's hard for us to even sit with it for 30 seconds to be like, whoops, that is not what meant to happen. And then to actually vocalize it out loud. There is such a shame culture that we've built in, or such a success-driven culture that we've built in within many of our, at least here in the States, but within many of the Western countries I have had a chance to visit, that it makes it really hard for us to access this chance and space for us to say, this was a difficulty. And what happens with that is that when we don't even label the difficulties in our life, how do we expect ourselves to reflect upon the lessons learned and what we can take out of them and how we can continue to grow and evolve and really take stock of those trials and see them to our benefit? Oftentimes we just shove them aside, we bury them, we hide them, and we put them in cases of shame that then people have to really unlock on their own, or work alongside friends and healthcare professionals to help them unlock those cases more successfully. So that's more my take on it, is how, as we as a society and as deep, intimate connections we have with each other, how are we really allowing that chance for failure to thrive?
Really interesting. So Nora, obviously you've held ministerial positions where there's an incredible amount of public scrutiny and very little tolerance for making mistakes. As obviously, there's people's lives in the way, and obviously public money at stake. But however, making a mistake as a politician is something that is bound to happen as well. So in your experience, how do politicians kind of face up to it, or do they even acknowledge it? And I guess how might we be able to kind of change the discourse around, you know, trial and error in kind of policy making, particularly from a kind of healthcare policy perspective?
It's not specific to health policy perspective, but more globally, the field of politics is a very complex field. And, you know, when you are facing the citizens, you have an obligation to achieve results. So meaning that you don't have the opportunity to make a mistake or to encounter a failure. You have to achieve your results. So when you say that, it doesn't mean that a politician is not a human. A politician is human, and he's able to do mistakes too. But in the position that he had, you know, mistakes are not really allowed. So, but now there's a trend that it is followed by politicians, because there are more and more scandals in the media, and the politicians go to the media, go to the television, and then claim in front of all the population that, yes, I did a mistake. That they do their confession, a real confession, but that raises another problem, the problem of sincerity. Is it right? Or is it just a mean to say to the people, okay, I have confessed, now you can trust on me, because, you know, I told you that I was guilty for doing this mistake or this behavior. And now that I'm, you know, I washed myself, I washed my behavior, and now I'm clean. And I deserve your truth. I deserve your confidence on me. So you allow me then to go further in a politician, pathway. But there's in a politician perspective, the people who admit publicly that they are wrong and they did mistake or they behave bad, they want to show that they are close to the citizen. They want to show that they admitting a weakness is a strength, and showing a strength means that you can give your confidence in me. You know, this is that communication strategy more than something that is sincere. And this is a problem because people, when they saw the politician going to the media and admitting their mistakes, citizens say, oh, it's just a communication strategy, and they want us to vote for them, and it's not true. And they have difficulty to believe on the sincerity of this behavior because it appears like a politician instrument. So people would like to believe on that, but they have a suspicious. The people who go to the media and admit their confession appear to be suspicious because people think that if they did a mistake and they did wrong or they lied, that means what? That they are able to lie another time and to make more and more mistakes. So when you are a politician, you're never right. If you say to the people, yes, I'm guilty, I did a mistake, then there's a suspicion. And if you don't do it, you're arrogant. And who do you think you are? You don't deserve our votes. So it's always a sort of game where there's no solution, and this is a big problem for the confidence on politician actors, because over the words, I think that the politicians should take some actions more than words, because the words means lying for the people. They don't admit that they have just lied once and they are not to lie anymore in the future. So this is a big problem for democracies, and because the people wait for more transparency, and they want to check everything. They want to have a confidence, and because of this lack of confidence, in each country we are watching a sort of movement into more radicalized politician movements, and that raises a big problem for democracies. And but I would say that those who confess publicly, it's easier for those who are no more in responsibility. They often do that after their responsibility. During their duty, they don't do. They let the time go, and then if they want to have more votes in the future, then they understand that they have to confess to the. This is a very big problem because of the confidence the people do in politics. Mea culpa is not always seen as a strength. That's what I want to say. It's more a communication instrument that sincere behavior. And also the confession is always perceived as personal objectives to achieve, and not collective, way to go to more transparency.
Yeah. That's quite an interesting perspective, and I must admit it's not the kind of answer, at least, that I had expecting in my mind. So actually, to segue into a slightly different topic related to failure as well, and to get the audience active again. Clearly, I believed by chairing this meeting that I was just somehow ipsos mori going to incessantly poll you all the time. So I'm going to poll you again. Great, we're receiving some very interesting Q&A questions, which I will keep for the Q&A session. I will go to, I didn't realize that I hadn't stopped sharing the results, to the next poll, which is going to talk about science and the potentially difficult relationship that science has with negative results. So I'm just going to launch the poll. And have that, see if there are any answers that come in. So the question here is, does science have a problem with negative results? So the different options are yes, definitely. Second, it's complicated. Third, not at all. And then the I don't know section. So for now, the top two responses are competing. So yes, definitely, and it's a complicated relationship. And actually that is a topic that I thought we could kind of all contribute to, really, because you've all been in academia in one way or the other. And I thought it would be quite interesting to hear your views on the difficult relationship that science might have with negative results. Obviously, in theory, the scientific method would want you to be quite open about the fact that, your theory might be disproved or that an experiment didn't work. However, we don't really see that many incentives to publish negative results, be it, results from clinical trials, or other types of studies. There has been a whole movement within academia to push for the publication of negative results. There have been journals of negative results emerging around. And I was wondering, what are your thoughts on this topic? So I will just end the poll right now, and then I will go to Brittany to give her response. So I will share the results, and it seems that it's a tie. So it seems that most of you think it's a complicated relationship, but still quite a lot also think that it definitely does have a problem. However, no one thinks that it doesn't have a problem at all. So Brittany, what's your view on these results?
Yeah, so I'm definitely voted it's a complicated relationship. What we find so oftentimes, at least within my fields of study and the work I have done in academia, is that when we are attempting to publish results that don't have the findings we were anticipating, there's obviously a whole host of reasons in the scientific method why that could have gone awry. But why I still think it's important for us to publish non-conclusive or non-substantive results is that it oftentimes is allowing voices that don't often show up in the academic sphere to finally have space and opportunity to share where things are not performing in the way that we might expect them to do so. And it also allows us to continue pushing the needle forward around questioning scientific methodology or different scientific premises. Now, how do we balance that with littering the field with an overabundance of information? I know that one of our participants actually asked a question, and this is not getting to that, by the way, so please.
Don't worry.
But one of our participants asked the question, right, with the proliferation of information that's coming at us all of the time, how do we discern which information is really useful and valuable? And I think it is such a delicate balance. So I do not have an answer for this. This is one I'm willing to admit I don't know, but the balance in how do we allow more voices to come to the field of science and to share what they have found or what they haven't, and so that way we as scientists can continue to fine tune and distill that process. That is an imperative need, but how do we then balance that against the noise and the static that could easily fill the field quite quickly?
Tali, do you have kind of any thoughts to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question of what is a negative result. So let me tell you, and it kind of relates to what Brittany says as well. I'll tell you a story. So a few years ago, we did a study on people with autism. We hypothesized that people with autism will show less social conformity than people not with autism, because we thought people with autism are less sensitive to social cues. So we did our experiment and we analyzed the data, and we found no difference between people with autism and controls in how they socially conform. And we were really surprised by this. So then we analyzed again and we analyzed again, but nothing, no difference. And we kind of sat on our data for a very long time. We kind of we didn't quite believe our own results because we were so stuck in our, hypothesis. And also we didn't know what to do with it. And we did think about publishing it in one of those null hypothesis journals that you mentioned. That was the first spot. But in fact, after thinking about it for a little bit more, I thought, well, in fact, this is a really interesting result. It's surprising, and it's also fascinating that people with autism show social conformity just like anyone else. And so instead of writing a paper about how autism is no different from controls, we wrote a paper about how people with autism show social conformity, just like healthy individuals. So despite the fact that it wasn't our hypothesis, it's not necessarily a null result. There's no difference. But I think it is the responsibility of the author, of the scientist, to show the reader why the data and the result is interesting. It doesn't matter if it's non-conclusive or conclusive, if it's against your hypothesis or not. It's still our responsibility to find out why it's interesting. And if you're able to do that, because if it's not interesting to anyone and it's not going to drive the field forward, then maybe, there's no point. Yeah. So I think that's what you need to do, regardless of what the result is. And once you can do that, then I think there's more space for different types of results. But you have to kind of get out of your head for a second in order to see it in this different frame.
Yeah.
And I'd love to just jump in, Tali. That is exactly the type of example I was thinking of, is how do we allow for diverse populations that always don't have voice within the field of science or haven't been traditionally studied? How do we actually show the differences are not amongst those populations? So that's a fantastic example, exactly what I was envisioning. Thank you.
Those are synergies there, great. Nora, do you have any kind of short reflections on this question, or shall we kind of move on?
Yeah, my background as a medical doctor in charge of clinical research in hospital, I had opportunities to analyze some combinations, and it was earlier in the epidemics of HIV infection. We did tested a patient with monotherapy, and we didn't know at this moment that the monotherapy was leading to mutation on the virus. And when the virologist shared this result with us, it was a shock. it was such a shock that initially the specialist, the virologist said, oh, we don't have to share that because it's too shocking. We cannot admit that a treatment that is supposed to give an advantage for the patient is disadvantaging the patient. So it took a little time to analyze and to see how we will communicate on that. And then admitting the mutations on the virus was a strength. After this period of shock, it was a strength because we were more focusing on the mutation in each kind of combination of therapy until the highly active antiviral therapies. I have another example of a drug which was in the combination of HIV patient. This drug was leading to side effects, morphological side effects, dysmorphia. Yeah. And the company, the industrial company, was not admitting these results. And it was up to the scientific community to publish and to share this negative result to the community, to the scientific community, because the company was not admitting that. So sometimes we always have to share results, good results, but either negative results, because it's a strength for the future, for more rearranging our methods, and putting the hypothesis for future researches.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I see there are so many questions from the audience. This is amazing. We have about 5 minutes before I wanted to open it up to the floor. So, and I had a bunch of other questions I wanted to ask you. So, I'm going to have to choose now. Okay, so completely jumping on the topic. And I'll just kind of do a quick wrap round and get kind of answers from all of you. Do you think that resilience is really the kind of antidote to our issues with failure? And if so, how do we go about developing it? And do you have kind of any tips or tricks to share with our audience? And I am going to start with the resilience specialist, Brittany.
Yes. So obviously I could spend an entire 2-3 hour lecture on this.
Please don't.
And this morning I was even skimming LinkedIn, and one thing I'm really noticing during this pandemic is that we are getting an influx of information towards us, and finally resilience has actually had a soapbox to stand on for a while. But this morning, even while skimming LinkedIn, I saw about 6 or 7 postings around resilience articles. And granted, I'm part of those networks. But I do think that resilience and thriving and your capacity to learn and grow is the ability and the antidote to failure, because that's really what it comes down to, is that you're always trying to aim for some level of homeostasis and maintaining normalcy. You have a huge wrench thrown into the dilemma. You have a huge problem and upheaval. And what resilience is your ability to bounce back. It's your ability to take what you've learned, take the wrench in tow, and figure out, how do I apply that wrench into my toolbox, or at least be aware of it, so that way I can move forward again successfully. And the only way we can experience resilience, and it's a really interesting concept, you are not resilient until you experience failure. You literally have to experience a setback for resilience to actually come about and for you to build those skill sets, because without failure, there is no resilience. So it is the antidote, but it's how you go about building and cultivating it, which is difficult. And the 3 biggest things, because we don't have time for a whole lovely pitch around it, but the 3 biggest things I oftentimes find for individuals is curiosity towards the problem. So just being curious about what led to this event, being curious about what opportunities to change it are available to you, and being curious about yourself in terms of how you want to do differently in the future. A second one is just problem solving. So really using all the problem solving skills and tools available to you and learning and taking on more that you can find. And then finally, the third one that we find time and time again is connection. So with connection, with sharing with others, with utilizing other thought leaders in the field or experts' opinions and using that some for your problem solving, through connection, we find that people are highly, highly resilient. And the mask upon it all, I'm gonna add a fourth one, I'm sorry, I lied everyone, but the mask upon it all is optimism. We find that the most resilient individuals are ones that can find the silver lining, can make a positive reframe around a situation, or can look back on a negative experience and say, this is what I learned, or this is how I changed, and that was of value to me. It's some thread of optimism that people can tie into their experience. And it doesn't need to be Pollyanna-ish, it doesn't need to be blind, but it's just an aspect of your overall work, and the effort that you're making is trying to find one small thing that changes your perspective towards more of a positive appraisal. Because as Tali was sharing earlier, we're always looking for confirmation bias and the ways that allow us to think about, well, this is the rule, this is the rule. By finding the exception to the rule through a more optimistic framework is where we begin to build resiliency and shift the narrative.
Really interesting. Thank you. Tali, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, I thought that was great. So maybe a more, not a more, but an optimistic message, kind of like diving into this optimism theme. So in fact, humans are extremely resilient, just kind of a little bit of a positive message here. They are resilient. They adapt extremely fast and extremely well to changes in environment, to hurdles and adversities. There's so many studies, things like after divorce, people actually bounce back to the same level of well-being. It takes them a year or so. But a lot of these hardships that we think about, being in prison, at first, they're very, very stressed. But in fact, within months, stress is reduced quite rapidly. Looking at the current situation, we've done studies on large populations in the US at the moment. And we found at the beginning, when people went into lockdown, there was a reduction in happiness, there was high stress. Within the month of lockdown, just 1 month, we saw a reduction in stress, an enhancement in a sense of agency and control, which is extremely important for your well-being, and an enhancement in optimism within a month. So we quickly adapt to these situations. In terms of what we can do, we've talked a little bit about what you can do to yourself. Just thinking, what can you do for others, whether it's kids, employees, or others. I think one thing that is a bit counterintuitive is let other people fail, at least those little failures, right? Whether it's your kids or your employees, it's really hard. It's really, you want to stop them from the failures. But if people actually go via those little failures that are hard, but are not gonna devastate them and kill them, then in fact, that's how they will build resilience. And then they will be more, have the skills that they need for next time, because when the big failure will come, when the big hardship, and it will come for everyone, they will be a little bit better prepared.
Great, thank you very much. Actually, Nora, there's one of the very last questions that came up in the Q&A, given that I did normally plan to start the Q&A at 10:02, so I will stick to my plan. But I will actually pick the last question, given that I would have liked to have your perspective on the topic of resilience. And this is slightly different because it's not like, I guess, from a kind of personal experience, but it is a bit more about your knowledge of the healthcare system in France. But there's a question from Alejandra, who is asking, from the perspectives of France's health system to the current crisis, how do you see the system potentially becoming more resilient?
How do I see it's more resilient?
Yes, or potentially being able to kind of bounce back from the crisis and become more resilient in the future.
We faced the COVID-19 with a shock. We were not prepared. Many countries were not prepared, and even although we have a very strong system with a big coverage, with a protective system, we were not prepared. I told it at the beginning. We were lacking, equipment, medical equipment. But the resilience gave more through the physicians, the hospital physicians, because they managed the hospitals, the unit, to receive the patients, which were very very numerous. I don't know if this is a good term, but there are a big number of patients coming to the hospitals. So the physicians, I would like to thank them, because they were organizing all the hospitals to receive the patients, and all the resilience came from the citizens. The citizens tried to sew the mask, and I wanted to show the mask that I did.
Yay. Oh, wow.
A sort of a mask that the people were sewing by themselves, because the government was not prepared to distribute the masks to the citizens. So we had a big problem of masks and some drugs, even if our system was strong. So all the society organized and endorsed a responsibility to prevent, the spread of the epidemics, and they allowed to stay at home. So for the French people, it was a very, very big challenge, because they are very Etienne, they are promoting their liberty, their freedom. It's
Yes.
included in the constitution. So it's losing a part of the freedom was something that was challenging for them, and they admit that. So all the people, all the physicians, the unit, the clinics, they organized, and the government, was not so efficient in the start of the epidemics.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, we have so many questions. This is really great. So going back to the very top, Stacy was asking a question regarding information seeking and what we do with it. How do we handle information that is often so very disparate and often feels partisan in working to question and to explore our beliefs? Okay, I think Tali, if that's okay, you would give a brief answer to this one, because we actually have about 11 questions to get through, which is going to be quite a lot in the time that we have left.
So I read that question, but I'm not sure. So regarding purchasing, what do you do? How do we handle information that is often different and partisan? So of course, if some information is partisan, right? And so the motive, so you have an idea of people's motives, and that would definitely affect how you value the information or think it's correct or not correct. I'm not sure if the question is how do I get more accurate information, but let me just answer what I think. But we definitely see that people will be more likely to seek information from people who are politically like them, even if the information has nothing to do with politics. So even in our study, you had information about like math. So even if information about math, I'm more likely to go to someone who's in the same political arena than me and than someone else. People are more likely to go to doctors, to lawyers, to take gardeners and architects that are in the same political space than they are. Even in situations where the evidence is in front of them that the other person is better at their jobs. So that is definitely something that is problematic. And I think it's largely problematic today in social media, because we often have an idea about the political orientation of people, even if what they are in front of us as is not politics, i.e. if I'm a scientist and I do my science and I'm presenting the science to you, maybe you can go online and figure out what's my political orientation, and that will then change the way that you take in my science, whether you believe me or not. And we see that to be true. So I think one way is to try to show the information without having any indication about the political orientation of the source, because sometimes the political orientation of the source has nothing to do, right, with the information that we give other people.
Yeah, very true. Gosh, we have even questions coming in from the YouTube live stream. This is quite interesting to manage. So let's actually go to Gemma's question, actually. So Gemma was thanking us for the very interesting discussion. Thank you, Gemma. So she is asking, so I find the comments about hiding away from and not admitting mistakes interesting, as I find that I and many of my colleagues, commonly female, often spend a lot of time focusing on mistakes we have made in both professional and personal settings. What are the panelists' thoughts on finding the balance between acknowledging and learning from mistakes versus dwelling on mistakes in a way that impacts confidence and progress? Brittany, is it okay if I kind of direct that question to you?
Yeah, that's fine. And I actually think this might tie in with one of our anonymous posters was also asking about gender distinctions. So as it relates to this balance, and oh, you cleared it. I was going to look at it. No, it's okay. It's fine.
If you click on the answered screen, I think you can.
Oh, perfect. Thank you for helping me navigate that. So Gemma, I think that this is a great question. So there is a balance between us internally looking at our mistakes, and then there's also a balance of having trusted advisors and individuals in our lives that we trust to test those mistakes out with. Hey, I think I made a massive misstep. I'm sharing this with you. I'm wanting to get your thoughts and reflections upon it. What was your perception of events? And that's a little bit different than when we are forced to do mistake recognition with maybe superiors or individuals that are direct reports to us, or even to trusted family members where we might have relationships that we need repairing around. But what I encourage people to think about first and foremost, regardless of gender, is first looking inward, then finding one or two individuals that you're willing to trust to look outward alongside, and then taking that message to share it more broadly if you're really willing to take that stance of vulnerability and be really have humility in your understanding of where there was a misstep. We do find gender-wise that women are far more likely within the United States culture. We do find that women are far more likely to admit to mistakes very readily, even take ownership of mistakes that are not theirs. So it's a very delicate balance to think through strategically, is this really a mistake or a learning that you have ownership around, or are there other responsible parties involved with as well? I can't speak obviously to many of our European counterparts that are involved in this call. And I am aware that Alejandra asked this really beautiful question too around cross-cultural understandings of mistakes and failures. I'm going to try to weave that in really quickly because of time, if that's okay. Okay, I see you nodding your head, Ellie. Failure is always dependent upon the society and our social positioning of what we know to be our own truth. And so if in a particular culture or organization, something is deemed a failure, and I want you to think about your own organizations you exist within and your own societal groups. If we know that something is deemed a failure, that's where it will be harder for us to examine it, hold it, and admit to it and learn from it. But if we can begin to change the narratives within our own social groups, within our own organizational cultures, we can then begin to shift what failure looks like and then what the resiliency strategies that are coupled alongside that can look like as well. But there are gender distinctions, there are certainly cultural distinctions, and there is this push and pull of vulnerability and then just ownership. And you need to have some trust in who you can do that vulnerable dance with.
Great, thank you. That was an amazing response. I don't know if any of the panelists wanted to reflect any other things on that specific topic, or shall I move on to another question? No? Okay. So I am going to take a question actually now from the YouTube live stream. So do the panel feel that COVID-19 will make the population more resilient or more fragile? Nora, I can see your eyebrows moving around, so I'm just going to pick you.
As I said, the people showed a very important strength during this period. Mm-hmm. They accepted to be, retreated in their home. They accepted not to go outside. They accepted a lot of things, and they did some things to prevent the spread of the epidemics, but in another way. And my two colleagues here are more skilled to talk about that. But I think there's a weakness, because during this confinement that we were assigned to, people get more fragile psychologically. They were isolated, no link with the families, no link with friends, no work at all. They stayed at home, so they were very afraid of being contaminated. They were afraid of contaminating their close people, and there is a lot of anxiety that we have observed during this period. And now that we are allowed to go outside now, since Monday, people are very vigilant. They are cautious because they don't know. They are suspicious also because they are looking for other people with a suspicion eye, you know, because they are afraid of being contaminated, and they are afraid of their children. You know, the children are allowed to go to the schools, but the parents decided not to allow their children to go to school because they are afraid of that. You know, there's a threat of COVID is still here because they are aware that the epidemic is not over, not yet, and they don't know. You know, there's a pending question: when will be over? This epidemic will be over. When? They don't know. They are wishing to have holidays during the summer. They wish that the epidemics will be over at the next autumn, but they are not sure, and so they're afraid. There's still a threat, and so I would answer a strength, very good way, and fragile because of the threat which is still here.
Yeah,
with the impact, psychological impact.
Of course. And actually, Nora, going on to a second question, which I'm guessing is directed to you. So going back to the Q&A list of questions. So it's a question from Mary Jo, who is asking if, so she is saying, so recently politicians and people in high positions of power and influence have been fired for mistakes they have made. Does this reflect society's fatigue with lies or double standards of politicians / people of high influence? Or does it reflect our challenge to accepting failure? And where do we draw the line?
I'm not sure I have understood all the questions.
So she is saying that relatively recently, politicians and people, I guess, in positions of power, have been fired for, mishaps or mistakes that they have made. And the question is around, do these examples reflect a change in society where people are just have had enough of lies or double standards, that they seem to perceive that at least the kind of powerful or the elites, or however you decide to kind of call it in the kind of public discourse, is they're just fed up with that, and that it's kind of,
I haven't seen anyone being fired during this COVID-19 epidemics in France, particularly. Although the former minister, which has been fired, not because of the COVID, because she went to run elections for Paris City. Mm-hmm. So this was the reason. So she has been replaced by another colleague, who is from my region here. So no one has been fired, to be honest. So in France, we keep our people in the position. We are not like northern countries where some difficulties lead people to stop their activities. Because we don't admit very well that the responsibility is endorsed by a person or another person. So what I know that now there's a lot of a complaint they are complaining people to the courts. Because there are some deaths and people don't admit that the government was not prepared. But I'm not sure that we will have, some achievements in that perspective. I'm not sure at all, because their responsibilities is very, very difficult to track, because it's all a system and it's not one person or another. So, I'm not sure that people will be guilty, really about their behavior or their actions, because what we see that is that the government does what possible it can do. So, and the second thing that the unpreparement was linked to the former governments who didn't do the stock, of the masks and the equipment. So it's not directly linked to the current government. I'm not sure that I have answered the question.
Well, Mary Jo will let us know in the next question if we haven't answered her question. So to sort of go on to a different topic, Liz, so I think this question is slightly more directed to Tali. So what are the dangers of living in an echo chamber, and how do we turn the tide and support society to become more open-minded? Great question.
Yeah, so echo chamber is definitely a problem nowadays, because anyone can put in any information that they want online. While a couple of decades ago, this wasn't possible. It's not that everyone had a voice. And on one hand, it's great that people have a voice. On the other hand, people have opinions and information that is basically not based on evidence or things like that. But then you get people who have like similar opinions, and it becomes this thing where everyone becomes more confident in their own opinions, regardless whether it's true or not true. And that's, of course, very, very problematic. And that can cause a polarization, which indeed we have been seeing in the last few years, maybe even a decade, in the US and the UK and other places. It's interesting to think, though, whether the current situation may actually reduce polarization. Because, and this is not necessarily related to echo chambers, but now everyone is focused, on one hand, everyone was focused on one villain, which is called COVID-19. Of course, how you deal with that, everyone has different opinions, but people are kind of now focused on that and not necessarily in other differences that they had. So it's interesting to see whether polarization will in fact decrease. That being said, people have different opinions about how to deal with it as well. But I think, to me, one important thing is, in fact, policy. Putting in more policy within social media, within the information that goes out there in the internet. There's not enough policy in that kind of domain. And the other is an incentive structure, which is part of the idea of policy, right? An incentive structure either on the individual or on the company, like Facebook, Google, and so on, that would drive them to take actions. And so in a way that we will have less false information online, less fake news online. Incentive structure is always, I think, one of the strongest forces, right? If you're actually punished, if you actually have to put in a fine when information is false, and you can't, it's a little bit difficult, because how do you know what's false and not false? And how do that's a bit of a difficult, but there are some solutions to that, because at least when it comes to information that's not online, to actual newspapers, there's a lot of laws of what's allowed and what's not allowed, and there's not as many at the moment for social media. So that is one solution to the problem.
Great, thank you very much. Actually, there was a question from the live stream that ties in quite nicely with one of the questions that I was meant to ask you, Brittany. So the question from the live stream is, how do panelists think failure is judged differently between academia, politics, startups, and kind of health/science? And I would like to tie that in a bit with, I guess, kind of your experience of working within a startup, and I guess how the iterative process of innovation actually works, and how potentially in the field of health tech, you almost kind of learn to embed a bit more the kind of process of failure in technological innovation.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I do think that there's this really interesting tension, especially in the startup tech landscape here in Silicon Valley. For those, I don't think I shared this earlier, I'm actually in San Francisco, California. And there is this interesting tension where, on one hand, many of the tech innovators here in the field that are not healthcare related, there's this entire ethos around move fast, break things, fail fast, fail quickly, fail smart, all of these lovely fad terms that are thrown around. But what I think there is a friction point and a tension that evolves is in healthcare, because in healthcare, we are routinely working with critical, vulnerable populations where we do have many regulations in place to make sure that we uphold consumer and patient rights, and to make sure that when we are trying to innovate and that when we are trying to advance our field and the opportunities for curative treatments or therapeutics, that it's not done at the harm to the patients and populations we are aiming to serve. And so within tech and startup culture, and healthcare tech in particular, it's this interesting duality of how do we move quickly, how do we come up with new innovative ideas, how do we break the mold, and how do we throw away what we've learned before, because that's what disruption is, but how do we all do it under regulation, auditing, requirements, and best healthcare practices? And I am not a leading healthcare technologist, innovator, or a thinker around this. I don't think we found the magic balance yet, though. And I did come from academia and more traditional hospital settings to move into the tech sphere. I found it to be a very interesting personal tension I was experiencing, because I'm used to spending years and months writing grants, getting permissions, getting IRB approvals, spending years on a study, and then finally finding myself in this environment where I had 2 weeks to come up with a project plan, initiate it, and look at the results. It's just a very different pacing, right, than what many of us are trained historically and traditionally to do, and how we typically adapt our technologies and our healthcare systems in place. So I don't have a perfect answer for it. What I do think is the idea of failure, though, in these spaces needs to be even more heavily questioned than what we've seen in other tech fields. So if you are a person that is sitting within a healthcare technology company and you're sitting in a healthcare startup industry space and you have a background in healthcare, I find you are charged with the responsibility to make sure that we do slow down the process at points, to make sure that patient safety and medical ethics and healthcare needs are really brought onto the table, examined closely, and then continue to move forward and try new opportunities and innovation efforts.
And do you feel that that ultimately comes from I guess also a kind of diversity of skills and experience within how the team is made up? Because I'm guessing, there's a kind of general stereotype, at least within the health tech space, that, if you kind of got the California tech bros come along and are like, yeah, let's just there's an app and there's this and there's that. And ultimately might not have the kind of clinical knowledge or understanding, that medicine has a way of working, which doesn't mean that it shouldn't work slightly differently for certain things. You might certainly not want to do a randomized control trial to understand if telehealth is a good idea, but there are still certain standards to follow. So do you think that ultimately the kind of team makeup is also an important thing?
Team makeup is absolutely imperative, and also having respect for each other. So the interdisciplinary opportunities that we have, again, I am not an engineer, I am not a product designer, but really drawing upon those deep wells of knowledge expertise is so important when we are sitting around the table and talking about how do we bring a new product or idea or service to market, and what do we need to have on deck to make that successful. And every clinician and every medical professional should own their voice, but to the point you just made, Ellie, is also acknowledging and taking respect for the deep voices that are also sitting around the table to understand, okay, how do we disrupt my own traditionally trained thought structure? Yeah. Because I definitely had my own kind of locked in perspectives around this is how you do things because it's how it's always been done. And even though I volunteered myself into the startup industry space, there was still a lot of learning curves and friction points related to just because I was trained to do something that way doesn't mean it always needs to be that way forever and always. Yeah. And again, how do we make sure that there are appropriate cushions and brakes in place to make sure that we are all moving the car together successfully, but not careening off of a cliff? And again, not to the detriment of ever patient health care needs, access, and quality care.
Great. Okay. Talit, actually, there was a specific question for you on autism. So very interesting finding about autism and social conformity. As someone on the spectrum, I rely on copying behavior I observe. I don't necessarily know why people behave the way that they do, but I've learned that it's what I expected. I guess I've never considered whether this is because I want to conform, I just want to fit in, or just another way of trying to communicate. Has there been any follow-up research on the piece that you did?
Yeah, that's a very good question and super insightful. We found that people with autism conform just like healthy individuals, but we don't know why, and we don't know via what mechanism. That is, you can have a person with autism and a person a healthy a control individual, and they show the same behavior, but it might be coming from very different places for different reasons via different processes. So I think this is exactly right, and this is what we suspect, but we don't have any follow-up data yet. So yes, and from other research, we do know that what this person is saying is exactly right, which is people with autism and related conditions do exactly that. They tend to copy, right? They realize that perhaps their behavior is not quite the same, and so they learn what to do, and so that the output, their behavior, will look more like the people around them. So, the people around them may be doing it for other reasons, conscious or unconscious. So why do people conform? They conform for two reasons. It's called private conformity and public conformity. Private conformity is the idea that I'm conforming, everyone's picking a green apple and not a red apple. I'm assuming a green apple is probably better, right? And so I pick a green apple because there's information in what people are doing. I can learn, right? It actually goes back to the idea of mistakes, because as humans, because we're social humans, we don't have to do trial and error ourselves on everything, right? We don't have to fail. We actually can look at other people, see what they're choosing, see what's right, what's wrong, what most people are doing. And if, no one's eating a berry, it's probably a poisonous one, so I shouldn't eat it either. So that's kind of private conformity. I do it because I get this information from people, from their behavior, that tells me something about the value of actions. The other reason people conform is they may not agree with you. I really like the red apple, but I don't want to look different. So that's called public conformity. I still have my own opinion that the green one is better, but I will do it because everyone else does it. That's why people conform. But with people with autism, we don't know. Could be absolutely different, or it could be the same. And it's a super interesting question.
Great. So there's one of the very last questions about FOMO. So let's take that one. So this is a very busy period, an important time for those who work in health, innovation, and science. Many of us are very fortunate that our professional lives have exploded during this period. I feel guilty that as a machine learning scientist in health, I didn't do anything that made any difference during this period. Have the panelists dealt with this kind of fear of missing out or missing the boat feeling, which Maxine feels has knocked her confidence quite a lot? Nora, would you maybe like to kind of tackle that question first? So have you had kind of any fear of having missed out on being able to kind of, I guess, partake in research or things directly related to the kind of COVID response?
Yes, it's hard to, when you are not, in a team working against COVID directly as a physician in the hospital, or as a politician, active politician in health area. We did a lot as elected, regional elected, because we solicited some companies, local companies, to prepare some masks. You have understood now that the mask was a huge problem here in France and in all the world. But yeah, we tried to solicit some local companies to compensate the lack of mask in preparation of the government. So we did that, and the local hospital has done a lot. But we still wonder what we could have done more and in a better way I think in this period, it's very hard to be part of the activities everywhere. So maybe we have to focus on our closeness, our close people, and focus on how we can prevent and protect our families. This is very, very important. The elder people, you know, in our families, how to prevent them, because it's there are big risks. How to prevent our people, how to deliver more messages, prevention messages. This is a part. How to help also local hospitals. That's what I did, and to propose our help. You know, whatever you do, it's always something which is relevant at what area you are. How, you know, the first thing, if you have raised your awareness, is a good step. If you raise your awareness about this infection, how to prevent your contamination, how to prevent the contamination of your clothes, this is an important step. Beginning by that does not allow you to say that we have not have done anything. So we can do, you know, some young people, students have done a lot towards the elderly, to make the shopping, you know, to shop for them, foods and prepare sometimes things. So whatever you do, it's always something very positive, and this is part of the resilience too.
Yeah, really true. Brittany, Telly, have you had any particular type of FOMO during this period?
I think the question touches on a very fundamental human need, which is we mostly work because we want to feel like we're doing something valuable, right? It's not only for money. The first thing is you want to feel you're doing something valuable. And I guess if, you know, today, some people just have to stop work. And in fact, if they do work, they make things worse, like restaurant people who own restaurants, right? You're suddenly, well, you felt like you're helping people by making food, but now people are telling you, you have to stop work, because if you work, that's when you put people in danger, right? So, so many people will feel, okay, I'm not valuable, and you still have a need. It's like 2 months, you need to do something valuable. So I think, you know, the solution is to see what can you do. So for example, so now, as I said, I have to teach my kids. So it doesn't help, you know, COVID, the infection, but I feel satisfaction from seeing, you know, my kids are getting better at math, they're getting better at reading. So then I feel useful. And what I did for my team is we actually, and this is something because our work is somewhat related to the situation, we straight away started a huge project to try to see what is, you know, the mental health consequences of this and so on. So we straight away put everyone together, but it was partially not because we were going to help, but partially because we needed to feel like we're helping, right? We needed to feel. So I think in doing that, I mean, we did find findings, but I feel it was more for everyone, for the students who are now just sitting at home, my team, to feel like, okay, there's something that they can do. They can like put their nails into and do and feel like it might be useful. And I also found that what they did was they also got into their other work that's unrelated to COVID with more motivation and passion, because they just had to do something. So I think even if it's something like, oh, you're growing your garden, you know, what you do is not necessarily going to directly impact the crisis, but we could still do things that are helpful and productive.
Great. Thank you very much. So let's see if we have time, maybe one, if we squeeze a tiny last question. Okay, let's see, from Bridget. How do we incentivize scientists and kind of journals to publish all results and explain why they're interesting, like suggested? I think that kind of comes back a bit to what you had said, Tali, which was actually about kind of the onus is on the author also to potentially make those type of results more interesting. So I will mark that as done. Sorry to have read that one out. Okay, so let's go to the next one up. As we encourage more candor and openness, to what extent do the panelists feel vulnerability is exploited by leaders exhibiting vulnerability in the corporate, public, academic, and startup sector? Wow, that is quite a big question. So as we encourage more candor and openness, to what extent do the panelists feel vulnerability is exploited? Okay. Does anyone have any kind of inkling of an answer on this one, or no? Brittany, Talee, I see faces nodding.
I guess I'm a little uncertain if this vulnerability exploitation is, because I read it as two different ways. Either A, leadership is taking advantage of employees being more vulnerable and being more open with mistakes being made, and that could lead to really negative repercussions. That's one form of exploitation. The other way I actually read it as well is a lot of these terms are being thrown around far more with a little bit of frivolity. So I think about how radical candor has great roots, but radical candor, vulnerability, mindfulness, these have all become very big fab terms that are being really promoted within a number of business sectors for really cutting edge opportunities for organizational change and culture creation. And those are all true aspects, but is it lip service? And is there true intentionality when we ask our leadership to take on vulnerability, when we ask them to promote psychological safety within an organizational setup, when we ask them to utilize radical candor in their supervisory performance review meetings? Are they actually doing it with knowledge and intent and backing to those efforts? Or are they just saying we're doing that now, but there's really not teeth in the argument? So I didn't actually answer that question. It's that those are my thoughts around what does exploitation of vulnerability look like within these sectors. And to avoid exploitation, it's really making sure, again, that everyone has put their signature on the line, that we are willing to try out these new strategies. And then we're going to hold each other accountable when these strategies, when you're not actually fulfilling your effort to be transparent, vulnerable, utilize radical candor, and enforce psychological safety. And that everyone within an organization really upholds that and stays true to it. Hopefully that got it.
Yeah. I mean, it's been absolutely fantastic. I must admit, I was really dying to ask you one last question, but I quite like to stick to time. So given that we only have about 1 minute left, I will bring this event to a close. It has been an absolute pleasure to have you on this panel. I must admit that I, as a true nerd, had been imagining having a conversation like that one day in my mind, kind of contrasting all of these different experiences. And I am just absolutely so delighted that it actually happened. So thank you so much, Talee, Brittany, and Nora, for sharing your experiences and knowledge with us about this topic that is obviously kind of very, very important to talk about. We will be running further activities, as I had mentioned, during this OHT week. So if you are on Twitter, do follow the OHT week hashtag, or check the One Health Tech Twitter account. You will find details about everything that is happening. Also on our website, there is the full schedule of events happening. We still have, so let's see, we have our fun socially distancing event tomorrow, which is our way of partying at a social distance virtually, which will be fun. I know that there are loads of quizzes and different things planned. We also have a brunch on Saturday, but basically kind of many activities. We hope to see more of you and all of you who have attended today there. All the events are free to join, so please do sign up. And thank you again to the attendees for really great questions. I genuinely did not expect to be receiving such a flurry of amazing questions. And I apologize to those that we didn't manage to answer the questions, but I kind of tried to select at least, like, I kind of know that the ones that were left were kind of topics that we had already slightly touched on. So yes, bringing the event to a close. Thank you so much for joining us. It was such a pleasure to have you from, many different places in the world, Boston, San Francisco, and Lyon, which is really amazing. So thank you very much, and bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.